It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, folks, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's episode 86. We've had a bit of a hiatus. I have been overseas, and I know my good mate here, Hong Kong Jack, has been scrambling away, been pulling people in the streets and having arguments with them, so he's just missed the podcast so much. How are you, mate? How you going? How's things in Hong Kong?
Good, excellent.
Well, how excellent was Typhoon Yagi? Are you? Do we need to send blankets?
No, Typhoon Yagi, we got a T8 and a T8 for nearly 12 hours or so. That's a Typhoon Warning 8, which means the city kind of shuts down.
Right.
No markets are open. All the traders are at home. This used to be a great excuse for a party, but what's ruined that is that people can now log on from home, so you can still work from your couch.
And be watched. And be watched logging on by your employer.
Yeah. Whereas in the old days, when we knew there was going to be a T8 tomorrow, everyone went to the pub and got stuck in because you knew you were going to be sitting in front of the TV tomorrow. So Simon with the sports bag used to come around and sell knockoff DVDs from Shenzhen, 3 for 100 honkies, and everyone would buy 3 at least, figuring that's going to deal with tomorrow. But this was a particularly limp typhoon in Hong Kong. It was wet and windy, but not
mercifully
weak.
Yeah.
Not so good in Hainan and in particular in Vietnam. I think they're up to 226 or something dead in Vietnam, with quite a few more unaccounted for.
That's through Yagi's flooding.
Yes, yeah. It was what we call a super typhoon. And a super typhoon's sustained winds over 250 kilometres an hour. So,
to my mates in FNQ, a little bit like the Hong Kongese experience in days of yore, that you figured you were never local until you'd been through one, and being through one basically meant sitting in a room with no windows, and drinking an enormous amount of booze until the whole thing blew over.
Yeah.
But you were never considered local until you'd been through one. Yeah,
there really isn't anything you can do when it's happening, so you might as well.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. All right. Well,
we've only had one bad one since I've been here, one really serious one, I was texting friends around town, and the guys in the taller buildings, particularly up the top, we're finding that their doors are opening and closing, and the odd window got blown in and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of pretty. And our building, as a 50-year-old building, you could hear every bone in the building creaking.
Yeah, that'd be a little unnerving when she shakes a bit.
Yeah. The noise was the most unnerving part of it. As a good friend of ours used to say, I didn't pull the brown corduroys on, but I was checking which drawer they were in.
So, I'm very grateful that our weather systems weren't too harsh for you. Terrible news south of Hong Kong, in Vietnam and Hainan, where there's been a lot of devastation and flooding. But the big news this week, Jack, was the presidential debate, the first time that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump met. And I noticed, the first thing I noticed was a bit of body language stuff, Jack, and that was Kamala getting forward and shaking the hand of Donald Trump basically while he was at the rostrum. And that was a good sign for me. It was a positive sign. She was a bit nervous when she started. She dismissed the question on inflation. Bit of a minefield for her, that one. But she's a little bit nervous to start with. But then she kind of hit her straps. And, look, it was a debate that was kind of hers to lose. Everyone knows who Donald Trump is. but American voters might have only seen Harris in a few clips. Wouldn't have known a lot about who she was. So they've had a good look now. It would seem that, I know that some opinions said that Donald Trump had won the debate. I did read one of those in the Australian, but it was a fairly comprehensive victory for her, for Kamala, for mine. Yours, Jack? Your view?
Yeah, I haven't watched every second of it, but yeah, I think she won tidily. I mean, she really just had to stand on her feet to win. Because people don't know her, if she sort of survived that okay, she was going to be a win, and she won reasonably handily.
Yeah, look, it's just some polling that comes straight out of that debate. It says that this is from WAPO, among voters who said they had heard at least something about Tuesday's debate, which is a funny sort of category, 53% said Harris won and 24% said Trump won. Some 52% of those familiar with the debate said Trump stumbled and didn't appear sharp, while 21% said that of Harris. Among Republican voters, 1 in 5 said Trump didn't appear sharp. So it was a win for her, but it was a win that she had to have. Since then,
Nate Silver says that with a debate like this, he reckons you wouldn't trust the polling, the national polling, for another week. He says because
I think that's right.
65 million people watch the debate, 160 million people will vote. So that means there's 100 million voters who didn't watch the debate.
Maybe they're the ones who fall into WAPO's heard at least something about the debate.
Yeah, and they will. Most of them will hear something about it or read a little bit about it, but that takes some days to filter through. So I think Silver's right. If you're looking at for what effect the debate had on the national vote or the battleground states, wait a week.
Yeah, too early. I agree. We will look at the polling post-debate, but I think what you would expect, or what the Democrat campaign would expect, is that she would get a bounce from the win, and that early days seems to be probable, but then it's about sustaining it. And that's the thing that we'll tend to see over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, because as we have seen in the polling pre-debate, there was a lot of love for Harris initially, and then that sort of started dropping off to the point where on the day of the debate, I think there was a Seattle New York Times poll putting them neck and neck. For what it's worth, the polling since the debate, a good group of polls. Reuters Ipsos has Harris +5. New York Post has Harris +3. Rasmussen Reports, which tends to skew to the GOP, has Trump +2. Morning Consult, less of a poll, has Harris by 5. And the Insider Advantage has Trump +1 in Michigan. All the rest that I quoted to you.
And the way I read those is, if she wins if she wins the national vote by 5, she's probably the president.
Yeah, I think that's
right.
It needs to be 4 to 5.
Yeah. But if she wins it by 3, she's probably not the president.
I think that's probably about right. I mean, I'll make another big statement about the election, Jack, and just about how quickly the count can come into some sort of conclusion. But I think if Harris wins Pennsylvania, I think that's pretty much it. So I think Pennsylvania is the critical state. She can afford to lose Georgia. It's neck and neck there. It's neck and neck in Pennsylvania. North Carolina is opening up a little bit with a +3 advantage in a poll that came out before the debate. But I think Pennsylvania, if it stays blue, she should win the election from there. As we just saw, it's just a Michigan Michigan polling there from Insider Advantage. I don't know a whole lot about that polling. If you can hold Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin should follow, and that would probably be it. We wouldn't need to go to the southwest to determine if she was going to get the 280 required.
The other unknown factor is that Trump outperformed the polls by about 9 points in 2016.
Yeah.
And by about 5 points in 2020.
So this is the syndrome that says, and it's particularly prevalent in polling face-to-face and telephone polling, that people won't tell the pollsters that they're voting for Trump because they're a little embarrassed by that. I would think now, after 8 years of Donald Trump being on the national stage, I would think that would be diminished somewhat, but it still may be a factor.
So it's gone down from 9 to 5 over the first 4-year gap.
Right.
And I expect it will come down again, but just how big it is, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, there is a sameness about the polling pre and post debate between in the 2016 race between Hillary and the Donald, where figures like Wisconsin, that shows Wisconsin and Michigan, for example, being fairly comfortable for the Democrats, but that not being realised come polling day. So,
but I agree with you. I think there will be a lot fewer shy Trump voters by 2024 than there were in 2016.
Well, they're all driving around in Teslas now, mate.
Yeah.
They're easier to spot. No, but I think Harris had a good debate. What's now worth watching is whether she gets a bounce. It would seem early days that she is, but most important, will that sustain? Will that sustain? Because if she does take a 5-point lead in the national polling, she should win. But we have a long way to go. 7 and a bit weeks, Jack.
55 days, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're now at 54. There are a number of things that are fairly strong around. I mean, they sort of knock over the point about the shyness of Trump voters for polling companies. Is that the Latino vote? Trump got 35% of that in 2020, and now he's running at about 51. So that's a really significant voting bloc. Obviously has implications for the Southwest, but nationwide as well. So those are the sorts of demographics that really show him improving in certain areas.
Young black males, same thing.
Yeah, okay. I haven't seen that.
I can't recall offhand the exact numbers, but he's
it
improving.
It wouldn't be 50. I can't
no,
imagine.
It's not 50%, but he's improving really markedly amongst young black males.
Yeah. Look, we've still got a very, very long way to go in this, and but I'd say Kamala Harris has done as well as she could have given the circumstances. I mean, we don't have to go back too far when we talk about debates. There's an obsession with knockout punches, isn't there? I read some stuff about how Kamala didn't, TKO Donald and all that sort of stuff. That stuff happens like once in a lifetime, and that includes us old blokes, Jack. And that happened with Joe Biden.
The last knockout punch that I don't think the Biden thing was a knockout punch. He was finished.
Well, it was a
that.
TKO. It was a TKO in his respect.
Yeah. The last real knockout punch I can remember is Ronald Reagan, and who was his opponent? I can't think. And they were the moderator asked the question of Reagan's age, And he just said, I want to go on the record as saying I'm not going to use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. And the smile on his opponent's face, he kind of knew it was over right about then.
Well, I would call that a good right cross in a debate, but it's not a knockout. So when I say knockout, what we saw with Biden, that is extraordinary. You probably see that once in our lifetime. The next question to ask is, how important are the polls? Because prior to the Biden event, there was a strong sense that the debates themselves didn't hold a lot of value in terms of determining how voters voted. And maybe we're back in those stakes again. As I say, what we'll see perhaps in 2 weeks' time in the polling, reputable polling. I noticed the Sydney Morning Herald was quoting Trafalgar polling, which is putting Harris in front, but it's a Republican poll. I mean, at least acknowledge what it is. But yeah, 2 weeks we'll see the degree of the bounce, and it'll take 4 to 6 and maybe 7 to find out if that's going to be sustained. But look, when we remember just how flat and low the Democrats were after the June debate, they're not in bad shape compared to that period of time anyway.
Yeah, she's done better than most people would have expected. Don't tell Peter Fitzsimons this, because he thinks the real polling is what happens on Twitter.
Twitter's another part of the world. It's another planet, really, in many ways. But yeah, look, people. I mean, I think a lot of Australian people that enjoy looking at politics look at America, particularly around Trump, and wonder how a guy who's sort of babbling about eating dogs and what have you, how he can be a credible candidate. I think the big issue here is that Americans have been through a great deal over the last 4 years, particularly around inflation. Inflation in any election is going to be a killer, because what you earn has suddenly declined. And there have been significant issues, particularly around food and gas, as the Americans call it, food and energy prices. I did notice the August inflation figures in the United States showed food pricing in decline, which is probably another good thing for the Harris campaign. But there's a long period of dissatisfaction with the Biden regime based around economics, and as we know, in all politics, the economy comes first as a voting driver.
The other thing that hangs around their neck is the Afghanistan withdrawal. Biden's approval rating dropped about 10 points overnight and has never recovered from that.
Yeah, I thought Kamala handled that fairly well, and it basically put it straight on Donald Trump sitting down and negotiating with the Taliban, including an invitation to the Taliban to Camp David. That would have been a fantastic photo opportunity. That one didn't happen, of course, but he was in fact negotiating directly with the Taliban, who, Jack, I've got to tell you this, are putting in a progressive ban on cricket in Afghanistan. Have you seen this?
I did. I saw this. I saw a wonderful comment on Twitter. Look, I know they've been barbaric about a few things, but this is really
this is beyond the pale. Yeah, I mean, the treatment of women and girls, this is just appalling, and now they've gone after cricket.
Yeah.
So,
the proper response, if you're an Australian and you're looking at it and saying, how can the Americans be voting for this bloke who we think is just dreadful? Right?
Raving lunatic.
Yeah. The proper response to that is, whenever the vote's not going the way you think it should, is to ask yourself, what do the people who were voting that way see that I don't?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, look back all the way back in 2016, I wrote a piece 3 days out of the election saying I didn't say that Trump would win, but what I did say was that Trump had a pathway to victory. Everyone thought that was unlikely. I think Hillary was leading by 4 or 5 points in the polls. It looked like a lock, but
Or more than 4 or 5 points. She was about 8 points in front, I think.
at certain times she was, but her polling did drop off after the FBI intervention. But the real issue was the GFC, which had a very light touch in Australia, had absolutely smashed the American economy, particularly for the middle and working classes. You had something like 9 million people ejected from their homes, and there was a hell of a lot of anger. And at the end of the day, this was a Wall Street constructed disaster, and people looked at all the hardship that they'd gone through, and then saw the Wall Street bailouts and basically no one going to jail. I think there was only one bloke who went to jail over it. So there was a real anger in the electorate at the time, and I think a desire to move away from machine-type politicians and let's have a look at a maverick in Donald Trump. That's been done now.
And he wasn't Hillary.
Well, she was the consummate machine politician. That's regardless of gender or anything else.
A very unpopular one.
Well, yeah. Look, Joe Biden might have been a better option at the time. In fact, Joe was told to sit down, wasn't he? And
he was.
But there was a hell of a lot of anger in the electorate at the time. And this time around, what we're seeing is the anger around pricing, around inflation,
and migration.
Yeah, look, that's probably a partisan view in many ways.
No, the Democrat polling shows it too.
Yeah, but as a voting determinant, Jack, it's secondary. It's secondary to the economy. You know, if you're earning $1,000 a week, and you had $800 of spending, and all of a sudden you've got $900 worth of spending, or $950 worth of spending, you know, you're hard up against it, so that's the thing. Inflation is a big vote killer. Yes, there are issues around the southern border and immigration generally, but it will be the economy that determines the outcome of this election. Things coming off the boil a little bit, which is good for Harris.
It nearly always is. It nearly always is the economy.
All right. So how does Donald go? What does Donald do now? Now he's actually said, all in caps on Truth Social, there will be no second debate. No second debate with Kamala, but there will be no further debate, which is kind of an acknowledgement that things didn't go terribly well. What does he do now, Jack?
Oh, he's just got to keep hammering inflation, immigration, Afghanistan, and the wars. That's what I think. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I did observe just the other day. Of course, it was the anniversary of 9/11 just a couple of days ago, and present in New York to commemorate the 9/11 attacks were Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump. And again, Harris reached out to Trump, shook his hand, and they had a civil conversation. It didn't last long. Wasn't minutes, but it was seconds. But it was a civil conversation conducted by both of them. And I just think maybe Americans need to see a little bit more of that.
Trump's been at his best over the last couple of months when he sat down for one-on-one interviews with people, and the video they did of he playing golf with Bryson DeChambeau. A number of anti-Trump friends of mine have sent me these, And they've all been astonished that sitting down one-on-one, he comes across as considered, polite, all those sort of things we don't normally think of him when he's doing his big rallies. One in particular, he was that the interviewer has had an addiction problem, and Trump spent 5 or 6 minutes talking about his experience that with his older brother, and he was really considerate and polite and caring. I mean, it was so un-Donald Trump-like as to be amazing.
Yeah, look, that's what I mean. I mean, he obviously plays his politics hard, but what I saw there was something that's perhaps lacking, that there's not enough focus on in the United States. It was two political opponents at each other's throats, shaking hands and having a civil conversation.
Yeah, they could tone the whole thing down a bit, in my view. Donald Trump's not a fascist. He was president for 4 years, and it didn't turn into Italy in the 1930s. And Kamala Harris is not a communist. She's been vice president for 3.5 years, and it hasn't turned into Soviet Russia.
Yeah.
So we could tone down some of that rhetoric.
Some of the extreme rhetoric. Well, this is the problem. This is the problem that Donald had. He was unprepared for the debate. He thought he could skate through with his cabaret act, but he wasn't well prepared, and that led him into getting into the deeply crazy stuff, and getting sucked in a bit too about crowd size and all that sort of stuff.
She was playing the Stephen Milne role, the St Kilda footballer who used to get under people's skin.
Just a little pinch, give you a little pinch every now and then, just till you get so annoyed that you explode. So, and that's an old prosecutor's trick, of course, isn't it, Jack? You have someone in the box and you just needle them, knowing that they're going to react. So she did pretty well there. I mean, what I'm saying is, we've got a long way to go. But the focus, incredible focus, will be on Pennsylvania and to a lesser degree Georgia, but that's still very intense. I'm struggling to see how the Democrats hold Georgia. They might get a rare win in North Carolina. North Carolina hasn't turned blue since Barack Obama's first election, and then he lost it in his re-election. So that might change things a bit, but Pennsylvania is where it's at, mate. By the way, nice little mention from Kamala about the 800,000 Polish Pennsylvanians and how they might view Russia, and we're going to have a little bit of a look at Poland soon. We do know that the Poles and the Russians do not get on, Jack.
Not best friends, no.
And it was a nice little needle too from her. The debate's all done and dusted. We will not have a third. And now it's about how both campaigns deal with the time remaining. We have it. Is it called the September surprise? I don't know.
The October surprise, they normally call it.
The October surprise. So we've still got that period to get through too. I don't know that there's too much that can be done, but you never know. So watch the polling, folks. See how what appear to be an early bounce, whether that's strong and whether that's sustained. That's the thing to be looking at right now.
One thing I did see on Twitter was being pushed by some Republican pro-Trump people. Was a video, a news report when Willie Brown was made elected mayor of San Francisco, and the video is quite good. It's talking about Willie's fondness for fancy clothes, expensive cars, and fine women. And standing right beside him when the fine women comes up is a very young and absolutely gorgeous Kamala Harris. The hair's glossy enough for a shampoo ad and all that sort of stuff. And the reporter says to her, "Are you his daughter?" And Kamala turns around and just blushes just enough and says, "No, I'm not." And of course, she was Willie Brown's girlfriend at the time, although he was married. the Republicans, the Trump people, are sending this around to make us think lesser of Harris. And I watched it and I thought, I'm starting to like this bird a bit more.
I was just going to say, I thought you were going to praise the advertising. That stuff to me is really, really dumb.
Yeah. Well, for starters, she looked more like Bill Clinton than Hillary.
Right.
And that's a plus because he was capable of winning elections and Hillary wasn't. So
I mean, look, I've seen things like references to her performing oral sex in order to advance her political ambitions and all these sorts of things. That is really dumb stuff. And it's dumb stuff because women will go, oh, well, this is the kind of shit I've had to put up with in my life too. So, that is just,
And about 40% of the blokes will say, well, she still goes okay. She still looks pretty good,
Yeah. No, I'm not.
So
I'm not endorsing that, Jack. But
it's just not a move.
We'll have a vice presidential debate soon, and I do apologise for listeners for not knowing when that date is, but it should be must-watch television because JD Vance, gee whiz, for me the great funniest moment of this election campaign was him in the donut shop. And where even Mike Pence said to say, gee, how hard is it to order a box of donuts? It was a shocker from day one. And then you've got the very schmaltzy VP candidate, Volts. So that should be something else. It might just be a bit of light fun, but I think it's going to be well worth watching.
Yeah, I've never watched a vice presidential debate.
This one promises so much, Jack. So I'm not quite sure of the date, but I'll try and find it as we get going.
One thing I'm pretty sure of, it'll have zero impact on the election.
Oh, absolutely. But if we're just wanting just a little bit of amusement, I think this one should be a must-watch sort of stuff. Vice President, October 1. Only 18 more sleeps. So, that'll be one to watch just for the comedy involved. Now, moving on to domestic matters, Jack. We'll go overseas a bit further on, other parts of the world. But Bill Shorten, former leader of the Labor Party, and Minister for the NDIS, but that's not his full title, has announced his resignation. What's his legacy to Australian politics and to the Labor Party, Jack?
He did a pretty good job, Bill.
I think most people would say so. He probably lost the unlosable, and made quite a few mistakes there. His previous campaign as Labor leader was very good, and he took Labor to within a couple of lengths of victory. That was the Malcolm Turnbull, very angry boy on election night. Well, it was was the morning after. He turned up at about 1 o'clock in the morning to talk to the faithful, having realised that Bill had taken him to very, very close to minority government.
Well, Bill was reasonably fortunate in that he got Malcolm Turnbull as his first opponent. And Malcolm was a very skillful man at a lot of things, but a great politician he's not.
Not a great campaigner. I mean, I think
a terrible campaigner. But I knew Bill slightly when he was in his early 20s, I suppose, and he was a sort of a quivering mass of ambition. And most people who met him in those days. A mate used to say, I'd like to buy him at my price and sell him at Bill's. He seemed to think he was the next Bob Hawke. And he never was that. But nevertheless, he was a good, solid performer for the government and full credit to it.
Possibly his lowest moment was the Sky News interview when he was a minister in the Gillard government. When he was basically been on a plane, hadn't heard what Julia Gillard said, but he said, whatever she said, I totally agree with, 100% behind.
Yeah, well, which of course is the answer every politician in that situation would give,
enough.
but they would dress it up a little bit more so that it was less obvious.
It was a fairly obvious thing. I think, opposition leader Peter Dutton described Mr. Shorten as let's just get it out of the way that Peter Dutton is not going to be gushing in his praise, but he described Shorten as a decent person. He paid tribute to the former Labor leader, noting the disappointing end to his time leading the party. He was a leader of the opposition, a job nobody in their right mind wants, including me. Everyone wants to get out of this job as quickly as they're able to. He recovered well, and he showed a level of dignity and respect to our democratic process that he should be honoured for. So I thought that was, for Peter Dutton, fairly high praise. Bill Shorten will be known as the father of the NDIS. We know it's not perfect. We also know that implementing such a significant reform, social reform, is not going to come without controversy and not going to come without a need to amend and adapt it. But he will be known as that, and I suspect a lot of people in this country with disabilities will be very, very grateful for Bill Shorten's contribution to politics in this country.
To be fair, I think the NDIS eventually will be as popular in the country as say, Medicare is, but no one ever gets something like Medicare or the NDIS right.
No, that's what I mean. These big sweeping reforms, they're always going to need to be amended, adapted, changed a bit, tweaked here, there, and clearly there are some issues around the NDIS, and we've got probably some providers that need to be looked at long and hard, and Bill Shorten's been talking about that too. But yeah, I think that's, if you were going to come away from a life in politics with that as with that reform under your belt, I think you've done fairly well.
Yeah, I think one thing that hasn't been widely covered, but I'm told, is that he's now kind of out of power in the Victorian ALP. He's been sidelined quite a lot. Which may have influenced his decision to go.
And he will take up a position as Vice Chancellor at ANU, I think.
Vice Chancellor.
Canberra University.
Canberra University.
Yes.
Gets a nice house tucked away in the trees out there, architect design place, and $1 million a year. Why not? I thought he might have been hanging on for a job overseas, but Washington's got you need dynamite to get Kevin out of there, and Stephen Smith's in London, isn't he?
They're the plum drinks trolleys. Those two.
Yeah. Although I always thought the Consul General in New York would be the job.
Oh, the LA job too, Jack. Now, let's not forget the Consul General in LA. That's just celebrities and piss-ups. That's basically all it is. But look, we wish Bill Shorten well. He's had a very good career. He's been a fine minister, a leader of the opposition. Couldn't break through. Got close.
He was asked about his role in the Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard thing, and he quoted Frank Sinatra, "Regrets I've had a few, but then again too few to mention." And it's always good to do something like that.
I do remember the night they rolled Kevin, and he was Bill was in the Vietnamese restaurant in Monaco. I'm trying to think of the name of, with a couple of mobile phones in one in each ear, basically.
Yeah. That was when Kevin was ringing around discovering that he had no support tomorrow and had to resign.
Yeah, I wouldn't put Shorten as an architect in that, an architect of that shift. It was a disaster, as we all know now. But certainly he would have been watching closely where the numbers were. Jim Chalmers, Jax, had a very confrontational relationship with the RBA. And he's copping a lot of flack, particularly in the Australian, about this. He believes that interest rates, well, the RBA should make, well, he's basically putting pressure on them to drop interest rates. The trouble is, we've still got high inflation in this country.
Yeah. We've got high inflation and a slow economy. And it would seem to me that Chalmers is more worried about the slow economy than the inflation.
Yeah, that's right. So the way to beat inflation, the way to slay that dragon, as Keating once said, is economic growth. And that's not really coming. But at the same time, we are seeing these price rises, particularly in the food sector. I don't know how they can talk about alcohol and tobacco going up by 1.5%, Jack, because it's all about tariffs in those two sectors. But these sort of basic standard things like cost of communications, cost of housing and rent, cost of food, groceries, those sorts of things are pretty damn high. I've just come back from London. We'll talk a bit about that. And London's not cheap, but not that I did a full grocery shop, but I found food to be a lot cheaper. Food and booze to be a lot cheaper in London than it is here.
Yeah, every one of my friends who has a business trip or a visit back to Australia comes back just shaking their head.
And look, we talked about this. The price of a meal in a cafe, how that's sort of, you get a couple of muffins and a couple of cups of coffee, and then you get a bill for $60. It's not so. Yes, that's expensive, but it's the food shopping. It's the food shop that is taking up a lot of the household spend, Jack.
Yeah, and the government. The question is, what's causing the inflation? And there are certainly part of the community who think that the government is spending up big in particular on government salaries and social benefits, and that's what's pushing the inflation. And you can't defeat inflation until you bring that down or slow that growth down. Other people say, look, no, it's all the Reserve Bank's fault. So, it's a battle that we wage for a while.
Yeah, I know. And the answer is probably a little bit of both. I mean, the Reserve Bank increasing interest rates is a fairly brutal way of dealing with inflation and can push your economy into recession. It is a fairly brutal method through monetary policy. But the other side of things is you've got government spending that has an inflationary impact at that fiscal level. So we've got probably two competing forces at the moment, haven't we?
We have. But the solution is not with either one of those. The solution, as you said before, is growth. And the best way to get growth that really improves people's lives is productivity growth. And productivity is not growing.
Yeah, look, we talk about the economy. It's the economy stupid when we talk about why people vote the way they do as a voting determinant, and we're seeing more and more. I'll talk about my own opinions soon, but the likelihood of a federal election next year leading to a minority government, Jack.
Yeah, but what the government's not doing is understanding, like the Hawke government did, that the way to get growth is to improve productivity. That's why we had the Wages Prices Summit with Hawke. The government's not doing that. It's giving away price rises without a rise in productivity. If you want to look at a really bad example of approaching this, look at the new UK government. The UK has a problem with people getting GP appointments and has a problem with the trains providing a reliable service. So the government gives 15% pay rises to the train drivers and 20% to the young doctors, but didn't demand productivity increases in response to that. And that's just the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, okay. But let's get back to this. It seems almost like a media obsession that we're headed headlong into minority government. My opinion on this is that the mathematics on it are so tight that it's far less likely than we would expect. And the Red Bridge poll is saying that
this is Cos Samaras' mob, is it?
Yeah, that's Samaras' mob there. He's saying that the 2 Teals seats may go back to the Libs, and Labor might lose a few here and there, and that will be headed towards minority government. I'd say it's fairly tight. Gerard Henderson, perhaps in a moment of optimism, has said that a minority Dutton government, it would be a possibility. I suspect Labor will lose seats, but I don't know that and they don't have a lot to lose. But I suspect that they will lose a couple of seats, but still hang on to a majority government. That's my view at the moment. But the big issue, like the United States, is everyone's the value of a dollar has gone down. In terms of their domestic, in terms of their household spending, and that is a real vote killer. And so the government needs to get across this. One thing I would say about them, with the possible exception of Chalmers, by the way, is they are terrible communicators, and Albanese in particular. He seems to jump on every little barbecue stopper that's going around.
They're very reactive, aren't they?
Very reactive. And really, this is not a hard caper, Jack. You know, you don't have to be Martin Luther King Jr. With all those oratorial skills, or perhaps even a Paul Keating. You've just simply got to say, this is where we are now, this is where we want to get to, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's what's called a political narrative. And there's nothing there from the government. It is, as you say, reactive, responsive to matters that arise.
Once again, whenever we talk about minority governments, people start talking about a minority Dutton government, and frankly, the chances of that happening, Labor would have to lose their mind.
Yeah.
People seem not to,
which is possible, Jack.
Yeah, which is possible.
We talked about one of those opportunities or one of those events not so long back.
People seem to, and David Spears was talking about.
No,
this.
it's an
Gerard
obsession.
Henderson, and they're talking about, if Dutton got the most seats, he would form a government. And this is not how it works.
No.
How it works is that the Prime Minister of the day goes and has a chat to the Governor-General, and she will act on his advice. And he will say, Mr. Dutton has more seats than me, but I can form a government.
I can or I can't. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if they lose, even if they were then to form a government and lose a motion of confidence in the House, right? That would require the Prime Minister to resign. But he would go to the Governor-General and say, I think we need to go back to the people.
Yep.
I want to call an election.
Yep.
So there won't be a minority Dutton government. Yep.
It's going to be very disappointing for Gerard Henderson on a
David
Friday
Spears.
afternoon. David Spears. But there is this obsession about a minority government. That, like I say, the mathematical probabilities of it, Jack, make it fairly remote, one way or the other. I mean, you're right. The Dutton one, we are talking about very long odds, very long probabilities.
For that to happen, Labor would have to go to the Governor-General, and Prime Minister have to go to the Governor-General and say, look, he's got more seats than me and we lost a vote of confidence. You should call on him to form a government.
We've had enough. We've had enough.
And we're going to change. We're going to stroll across to the other side of the House and sit there and make ourselves comfortable. You know?
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. It is quite appalling, some of the analysis that we're given on this sort of stuff. I would say that there seems to be, there may well be a bit of dissatisfaction with the Teals. There may well be some independents get up in Western Sydney. You have a good look around at some of the seats that the Libs need to win, and there's no way I think they can form a majority government. And as you say, the likelihood of them forming minority government based on Westminster traditions is virtually zero.
Yeah, my personal view is that like every other leader who got the job after a change of government, that Dutton won't win the next election because that never happens. As bad as the Whitlam government was in some ways, Billy Snedden couldn't win the next election.
He didn't win, Jack, but he didn't lose.
Didn't get it. What did he say?
No,
I just didn't get enough votes. Yeah.
No. He didn't win, but he didn't lose. We didn't win, but we didn't lose.
We didn't lose.
Yeah.
So Peter Dutton's taken on what historically in Australia is a very thankless task, is to be the first leader of the opposition after a defeat. And no one since the war has turned that into a victory, and I don't expect he will either.
We just want to mention now, going over to the UK, we'll get into my rather limited experience of the UK shortly, but there are an increasing number of what we call small boat deaths. These are asylum seekers drowning basically in the English Channel. And there seems to be a fair amount of blame shifting between the English and the French, Jack.
Yep. There is.
So we have a new government in the UK. My questions to a number of people about Sir Keir Starmer is that he was a fairly insipid sort of fellow, but a very hard-working one, and that he seems to be just exactly what they need right now, rather than a Blair or some charismatic figure. But there is a very strong sense that there's very little they, or indeed Europe, can do about refugees and immigration generally.
Yes, immigration is a disaster right across the UK, right across Europe and the UK.
Look, I had. We're talking about what I did on my holidays. I was at Lord's watching the cricket, and I was with a couple of friends, and they were sitting. I was sitting next to a Greek Cypriot, a UK citizen, but a man who was born in Greek Cyprus, and he was saying. And my friend moved away very quickly and sort of shoved me down, so I had to sit next to this bloke. This country's ruined. Basically, he was going to go and live in Greek Cyprus, and basically he was saying all these people are coming over here. It was the full sort of, I don't know what you call it, full racist display, actually. And look, I converse with him because I think it's always important to speak to people who may hold extreme views, maybe temper them a little bit. And he said, now, how did it all work in Australia? And I explained how Manus Island worked and Nauru worked, and how the exclusion of Christmas Islands and other territories worked, and how we had very high levels of boat arrivals, and then that problem was essentially dealt with, albeit in quite a cruel way. I would say that's my opinion. I also said that we continue to receive a number of boats, and where we have agreements with other countries like Sri Lanka, those people just go straight home. And then I went on to explain to him that this is all about boats, because people are just arriving by plane in the meantime who can put their hands up and say, well, I seek protection, and then go through a long process that can often take 5 or 6 years. And he said, "Oh, it's not nearly as good as I heard it was." The Australian system of asylum seeker management is held up in the UK as the perfect model, which I find very strange.
Yeah, the French, like the Indonesians did with Australia, have a belief that there is no point in chasing down the smuggler gangs because they are just dealing with a demand. And if you wipe out one smuggler gang, another one will turn up straight away because their demand's there.
It's just profit.
They say you've got to look at why the demand's there, and I think they're right. The Indonesians used to say to Australians, "You must take the sugar off the table. You must take the benefits of arriving by boat off the table," and that's what the Australians did, and that worked. And that's what the UK's got to look at. But this is a Europe-wide problem. The Schengen Agreement was supposed to provide passport-free travel for every country in the Schengen Agreement, but the rules allow for temporary provisions for countries to put up temporary provisions to check passports as they're going across the borders. And currently, Germany's announced it's going to start doing this next week, I think. But currently, Austria, Slovenia, Italy, France, Denmark, and Sweden are all checking passports at the borders again. So this is not a UK specific problem. This is right across Europe. Yeah. And your Greek Cypriot pal would find plenty of people who are angry enough of what's been allowed to happen to say something fairly similar.
Yeah. It was quite notable. So meanwhile, my friend who I was visiting and spent a lot of time with there, and his family and his friends, a lot of pubs in Maida Vale and a lot of pubs in Little Venice and Marylebone and places like that. Had a lovely time. On my first day, he said, "Look, the Notting Hill Festival's on. You want to get along there?" He was, as it happened, travelling into Germany for work. So I wandered down to the Notting Hill Festival from where I was staying. And so this is a story against me as an observant journalist. The streets were packed. I didn't realise, or he didn't tell me, that it is a Jamaican festival. So I was wandering around in a heavily black crowd. Felt no sense of threat, and it seemed to be a sort of a joyous kind of event. And I wandered through their very, very packed streets all the way up to the Portobello Road, and had a good look around there. Didn't smell any ganja or anything like that. Just seemed to be a very, very good and happy crowd. So I wandered back to the hotel, still a little bit jet lagged. Looked at the BBC reports the next day. 8 stabbings and 230 arrested. Didn't see a bit of that. Didn't see anything there. And the other thing that you will love about the UK, Jack, it's a golden heaven of electric vehicles. And that's because London has what they call an ultra-low emission zone, which they've just extended.
The ULEZ.
The ULEZ, and which they've just extended to Greater London just on the 1st of September this year. So if you're driving an old burner, an old internal combustion engine, it'll cost you £12.50, $25, just for being in the area. It's not a congestion. It's outside. This congestion tax still exists, but it's outside of the congestion tax. So you just don't see any old cars. Certainly around central London, you see a lot of BMWs, a lot of electric vehicles, the odd Tesla, Mercedes-Benz. I mean, it was pretty wealthy part of the country, but you see a lot of EVs. It would have brought a tear to your eye, Jack. And the other thing is you can just plug them into the lampposts.
Yeah, I saw a councillor from outer London in one of the areas where the ULEZ has just been extended.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And she's doing a press conference sitting next to Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London.
Yeah.
he was probably sitting on 3 phone books, but so he could be at the right height. And she was saying, look, we need to do this because up until now, half of my constituency has been inside the ULEZ zone and half of it's been outside the ULEZ zone. And I don't think it's fair that half of my constituents should have air that's much worse than the other half.
Yeah, that's kind of a bit silly, but the whole point of it is...
It reminded me of my first trip to London in 1994, I think it was, and Pal and I went and saw 4 weddings and a funeral, that's how long ago it was, at the cinema in Notting Hill, and I was amazed because on the left-hand side of the cinema you could smoke, and on the right-hand side of the cinema, it was smoking banned. Thank you very much.
The Brits do some silly things like that. I mean, you in the streets of St John's Wood, Maida Vale, those sorts of places, Marylebone, you plug your charger into the lamppost jack. And not all of them will provide that, will give you that provision, but that's how they do it. You really don't see any old cars in certainly in inner London at all.
I think you're allowed to have a very old car, but you can't have...
you're very old, like 100 years old. Yes, yeah. And our good mate Warren Brown is about to venture off from London to Melbourne in a 1926 Bean. And that I think is following the line of an Australian adventurer by the name of Birtles, and so it'll be a lovely little trip, you reckon, through Europe, then to Greece, then by boat to Alexandria, all very lovely at this point. And I said, and then I think they also go from boat from the Horn of Africa to Mumbai. And I said, what about Myanmar? And he goes, yeah, we're not quite sure how we're going to do that. So we'll see how we go. We'll see how he goes there. Look, one thing that I found about London just very finally was that it is a brilliant example, a very successful example of multiculturalism. Far more on display than we would see in Sydney or Melbourne or our major cities. And
the only thing
all
I found
attentions, it seems like everyone gets on okay for the most part. Although there were 8 stabbings that I did miss at the Notting Hill Festival.
Yeah. The only thing I found odd about it, even back in 1984, was that a mate was saying, lots of Asians around here. I'm saying, no, there's no Asians. What are you talking about? Of course, their version of we think of Asians, we think of East Asians, Southeast Asians.
We think of yes.
Yeah.
And South Asian, a lot of Africans, of course, living in the UK, and a lot of people from the Caribbean. That's one particular group that we don't see very much of in Australia. Look. Got to say, everything I saw told me it was a very successful place. Moving on away from the what I did on my holiday segment, Israel, Jack and Gaz. When last we spoke, we were thinking a peace deal might be possible, a ceasefire might be possible. Nothing yet, and in the meantime, there's been an attack on a refuge there. It's just getting worse. There are now, of course, protests within Israel against the Netanyahu government, but no prospect yet of a ceasefire.
No. The demonstrations in Israel are quite large.
Yes, they are big numbers.
And up until now, the Israeli electorate has seemed quite resolute about pursuing the war of getting rid of Hamas.
Yeah.
But two things seem to be happening: is perhaps their faith that Hamas, that a sufficient victory can be achieved, has diminished, and they want the hostages released.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
That's the crucial matter.
There was a soldier, what was his name? Gilad Shalit, who Hezbollah held for 5 years, right? And to get him back, the Israelis released a minimum of 1,000 and perhaps multiples of that of Hezbollah detainees to get him back. And that sort of mood seems to be coming back.
All right, something for us to keep an eye on, Jack. We did promise a bit of a discussion about Poland. And it is becoming an increasingly rich country. It currently has a recently elected progressive government, growth at around about 3%, and things are kind of firing, Jack. Things are going extremely well in Poland.
Yeah, we tend to forget how big it is. 36 million people, fifth or sixth largest economy in Europe, and it is humming. The Warsaw Stock Exchange has gone up 24% in a year.
Low tax environment, low personal tax environment, top personal rate 32%, Jack.
Yeah, corporate tax just 19%. Has access to the European market, but none of the drawbacks of being in the euro. It doesn't have the immigration problems because, like Hungary, they won't let them in. They're prepared to be fined by the EU rather than take in the migrants. But it's an outstanding success. You tend to get this when governments have been under communist rule for 50 years. They're going to get growth when they get out of it because that's been holding their growth back.
Yeah, look, sometimes, I mean, it is a difficult transition. And when we look at some of the failures, we might look at places like Moldova and Albania, for example, two countries
but
that have,
the trouble
that
with
have not
places like
transitioned.
They did transition, but they transitioned from communist rule to rule by gangsters.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the problem with the Albanians. I had a very interesting meeting, a very long lunch actually, with a British KC, criminal barrister. He also is a circuit judge, and he had defended a member of an Albanian crime gang, Jack. Who had got involved in a Barney with another Albanian group in a nightclub. He left the nightclub. He returned with an iron bar, and he is seen on CCTV entering the premises with the iron bar in hand. There's no further CCTV footage, but then he went on to basically beat this other gang member, rival Albanian gang member, to death with the metal bar. Stuck the metal bar in his jacket, walked out, and ultimately was charged with murder. And the KC I was talking to said, "Now look, I can explain the CCTV footage with him walking in with the metal bar. I can explain the fact that there was the blood of the deceased in this man's inside jacket pocket. I can explain a whole raft of things, but the Albanian, the Albanian charged with the murder wasn't having it. He said, I've got a plea." And it was only afterwards that the KC explained that he became aware of this. Had the Albanian fellow charged with murder sought a defence and sought to avoid conviction, that would have meant a blood feud between his gang and his family and the deceased's family. That almost certainly would have led to the deaths of his parents, his siblings, his children if he had any. And so he took the 25 on the roof rather than seek the defensive skills of this rather wonderful KC.
Who knows? He might be out already because they're actually releasing people from prison because
I don't think they'll be releasing this guy in a hurry, but they are letting a few go. Their prisons are full to burst at the moment.
Saw an interview with one old lag. He spent most of his time most of his life in prison. He said, "Oh, look, I was quite comfortable in there. I had I had my kettle and my television, and now I don't know. Well, I'm 3 meals a day, and I'll probably end up sleeping under a bridge tonight. You know,
and then I'm going to reoffend, and then I'm going to go back in the jail.
Go back in.
When I first met this KC, he just arrived from a trial, and this was a matter of a young woman who was working for the constabulary, for the Surrey Constabulary, but wasn't actually a member of the police, but she had been giving information to drug gangs. It didn't seem like she was earning any money out of it, but I think she had a brother who was a cocaine user and so on and so forth. And I said to my new KC friend, I said, so how did you get on? He goes, we came second.
Yeah.
But very lovely, very funny lunch indeed. Moving on, Jack, South Korea. This is a nation with the lowest birth rate, I think, in the OECD, right? And
in the world, I think.
Is it the world? I mean, this is a phenomenon. It's because Japan's birth rate is really, really low too. So is this peculiar to Southeast Asia?
It's taken hold in Southeast Asia, but it's right around the Western world.
Yeah, we're going okay here, I think.
Not too bad in Australia. Italy's pretty terrible.
Certainly in my family, we're flying the flag, Jack.
Yeah. Not too bad in Australia. Italy's pretty bad. Nowhere else in Europe's great. But East Asia, certainly South Korea and Japan, is very low birth rates.
And that is having an effect in South Korea, at least, on a lot of doggy stuff, Jack. A lot of pet stuff. People are getting spoiling their dogs instead.
Yeah, the dog strollers thing is actually a thing here in some parts of Hong Kong, in my neighbourhood.
What is a dog stroller? What is it?
It's like a little pram for a dog.
Oh, for the dog. Oh, you put the dog in a pram.
Yeah. So you'll see a little a mini poodle or
something.
Shih
Tzu, yeah. Well, not a Shih Tzu perhaps, but I know what you mean. Yeah,
tucked up in the you'll see it. They're generally women walking along, wheeling, and you're sort of having a look, see what the baby looks like, and it's very furry, you know.
Oh, yeah. Look, this is not a Western thing, obviously.
No.
We do, of course, spoil our pets hideously, and there's an entire industry, multi-billion-dollar industry devoted to all this stuff. But I don't think we've actually got to the point of putting dogs in prams. They're supposed to walk, aren't they?
Yeah, they're supposed to. Even if they're wearing shoes, which is also an East Asian thing, you'll see them here, but I'm told more so in Korea and Japan. You'll see them, they'll put little booties on them so that when they go back into the flat, they just take the booties off. So, like the humans, no shoes and no shoes on
inside, of course. Yeah. That needs to be observed. South Africa, Jack, and I'll try and get the Chidima Adesina entered the Miss South Africa contest, and this is the Miss Universe as a prelim to the Miss Universe, and she'd lived in South Africa since birth, but she ended up winning it for Nigeria, Jack.
Yeah, she had a Nigerian dad, and there's dispute as to whether her mother's Nigerian or a South African, and huge controversy over this, and the local Black South African community were outraged. So she gave up and went to Nigeria and won there instead. It's just a little reminder that these sort of ethnic problems, they're not just restricted to white people, but within the black community, there can be just as many disputes of this kind.
And over to Canada, just very, very quickly, because we've got so much to handle in sport. We've got a next federal election scheduled for October 2025, but it may be coming a little bit earlier than we expected, Jack.
It's possible. At the moment, the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau's party, which is really our Labor Party in Australia, it had been in agreement with the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, a lot of Sikhs in Canada. And
That's the new Democratic Party, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. And Singh has taken his party out of the supply and confidence agreement. So it remains to be seen whether Trudeau can keep his government going or whether he will have to go to an election early. And the polling at the moment is 41% to the Conservatives, Liberals at 24%, NDP at 19%, and the Greens at 5%. So it's first past the post voting. It's probable that the Conservatives would win the election, but not guaranteed.
Yeah, I think we've been talking about Justin Trudeau's career, how long it would go for, how long his government would last. I would think that it won't survive the next election, whenever that is.
Personally, I'll be sorry to see him go. He's a source of great mirth.
One of the great performative politicians in the world, Jack.
Yeah.
Sport. Well, let's start with something really silly. Hobby horse championships in the UK. I'm disappointed that I didn't know about this when I was over there. These are people who basically get around on stuffed horses, right?
Well, it's like the hobby horses the kids have.
Yeah,
it's a stick with a horse's head on it, right? And you put it between your legs and you kind of gallop around.
It's fun when you fall.
Yeah.
But there are adults doing this, Jack.
There are adults doing this in the UK, and they have a championship. They set up little jumps so they can jump over the little jumps, and they do dressage and all that kind of stuff, you know.
Oh, dear.
There's just no doubt about the Brits, is there? You know,
They are a weird mob. There's no doubt about that at all. Yes, I'm glad I didn't know that was on. Otherwise, I would have felt awful about missing it. Over to the football. Let's start with the Australian rules football, Jack. Bulldogs and Blues, Carlton. I got to tell you, I was on the burner at Heathrow and checking the score from the Gabba. The last one I got was 61-0. Deep into the second half, and I didn't get an update on that score until I hit Perth about 15 or 16 hours later. Look, it wasn't as bad as that, but obviously the Blues just didn't turn up in the first half, and that was awful. Western Bulldogs considered probably one of the best lists going around, probably underperformed like the Blues. Both clubs saying they are using the word disappointing around their season, but they're gone, and we've only got 6 left. Port were terrible, weren't they? I did actually watch that game.
I like the comment from Dane Swan on the Port loss. Just a reminder for Port fans that percentage doesn't matter in finals. I like the fact that the players saved their legs in the second half so they could be fresh as they can be for the elimination final next week. You can't teach footy smarts.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was their actual aim. How can they come back from that belting, Jack, at the hands of Geelong?
The record of teams who've been given a belting in a qualifying final and then coming out and winning the elimination final is actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, and I haven't looked at the head-to-heads too much, but I'm just getting the feeling that Port might bounce back, and that the Hawks, while on a roll and playing wonderful football, they might have just played one final too many, or one big game too many, for a young side, that is. So that's tonight's game as we record this.
And the winner of that goes to Sydney next week.
Indeed. So I think the Giants are a top 4 side without doubt, and but they've got a tough one. They play the Lions at home. That is at the showgrounds in Sydney. How do you see that one falling? I reckon that's a toss of the coin.
I would stick with the Giants with that. I think.
I can see how the Lions dropped off in the second half. They were very good, obviously, in the first half.
The other thing was Carlton finally got Tom De Koning on the field, which made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was lots of problems there with Carlton bringing back blokes who
were a bit underdone. Let's be kind.
We'll just see how that goes. I rate the Giants very highly. So if the Giants or the Lions should come through, they will go on to play Geelong in the prelim.
If I was going to say who looked better last week, Brisbane or the Giants. Despite the fact the Giants got beaten, the Giants looked better than Brisbane to me. The Giants were terrific for three quarters.
Good call. Yep. And that has been the game of the final series so far, the Giants v Sydney, and just a wonderful response. I did actually watch the replay when I got home, and just a wonderful response from Sydney, and they will take some beating to win the flag. I would think they're going to play. Whoever they play, they're going to play them at the SCG in the preliminary final, and that pretty much guarantees them a grand final, I think.
And I think their strength is that, as they showed against the Giants, you can beat them for three quarters, but if you give them a quarter, they can win it in a quarter.
Yeah. And I think Isaac Heaney also said, guess who's the best footballer in the AFL right now? And there weren't too many arguments, were there?
No, he was terrific, wasn't he? It was just it was a joy to watch him.
He's just
but
an extraordinary
in the
player.
last quarter, they let he, Warner, and Goulden off the chain, and that was enough.
Well, it's not as if they let him off the chain. It's just that they basically had to forget it. Who was Heaney's opponent? And he's got more leg speed than Heaney, but Heaney's just smarter footballer, and he just knows where to be, and then push off because he's strong, and then break away and kick goals. He'd probably kick one of the goals of the season from 65 metres out, and I haven't seen a better mark than the one he took in the third quarter for, I'm going to say, about 5 years, Jack, maybe longer. Might be one of the best of all time. All right, NRL. Tonight we got the Panthers v the Roosters. Tomorrow, Storm v Sharks. So the top 4 play each other, more or less, in the first couple of days. The Cowboys are at home in Townsville to the Knights, and should account for them. Bulldogs v Sea Eagles. That's 6v7 at Olympic Park on Saturday. It's the first finals appearance for the Bulldogs since 2016. And the Eagles are mild favourites. I think it's $1.93 to $1.91. And that might possibly be because the Bulldogs had a little bit of a distraction during the week when their wingman, Josh Addo-Carr, failed a roadside drug test. The second sample has been sent off for analysis, and we won't know that for about 10 weeks. But it did show the extraordinary diplomatic skills of Gus Gould, who just took on the management of it. And he wasn't always perhaps well informed by Josh Addo-Carr as to what happened. But Big Gus is a hard bloke for the media to get around. He stomped on that a little bit. Who wins the flag, Jack? Give me a tip for the flag, or
Storm.
Yeah, I think Storm are going to win it. And Panthers probably the biggest test.
Probably the biggest risk. Now, did you see Jamie Smith, the England player, the new wicketkeeper, have a hit over there?
Yeah, I did. And he looks.
I watched him make a 70-odd in a losing test, the last test, and he looks the goods.
Well, the bowler that they've got, he actually made 100 against Sri Lankan bat a bit as well. I'm just trying to think of his name. He bowls at a fairly rapid rate.
Gus Atkinson.
Gus Atkinson. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for that. I should have known it. I saw him and he looked impressive. His one will certainly go okay in Australia, certainly because he can bat. But his bowling is the go. A rather sad story about him. His mother was killed in a car accident by a drink driver who fled the country and has only just been arrested, I think, and extradited back to the UK. So a terrible sorrow in his recent around his debut for his country. But he looks set as a player. I did go to the Oval. On the first day's play, it was a lot of bad light and rain around, so I didn't hang around there. They're profligate the English were profligate against the Sri Lankans. Good on the Sri Lankans for winning a test out of the three, but I thought they were profligate and didn't put enough value on their wickets. And then when they got to bowling, and the big issue for England going forward is going to be their bowling attack, how they rebuild their attack. Right now they don't have a set spinner. They've got a couple of blokes who can run in and bowl pretty fast. I mean, Wood didn't play in this series, but he's going to be around. The trouble with him is that he doesn't back up. So they've got a whole a whole attack to rebuild, and their batting. Joe Root, I saw him make 100 at Lords. He's, I think, made more hundreds than any current player by a couple, by two or three ahead of Steve Smith, Virat Kohli, Williamson, etc. Quality player, one of the all-time greats. Jack Crawley's missing too. So
the last frontier for Joe is Australia.
Yeah, look, he's you're facing pretty good attacks here. I would think their biggest concern is how they're going to develop a three seamers and one spinner and stick with them. They're also missing Zach Crawley, so he's another player whose quality he'll get in amongst them. I don't rate their other opener, the little bloke. I know he gets runs, but
the fire hydrant. Speaking of spinners, Surrey were playing Somerset yesterday, I think it was, and Somerset needed 7 wickets in an hour to get the win.
Yeah,
and they had Jack Leach, who I think is England's best spinner. The best off spinner at any event, from one end, and Archie Vaughan, Michael Vaughan's son, from the other, and they skittled them. They got the 7 in an hour.
Yeah, I actually saw a little clip of that. Yeah, look, they could go past. They could go worse than Jack, he bowls left arm orthodox. Doesn't he?
Yeah, bowls left arm orthodox. You have a combination of him and the young Pakistani heritage leg spinner, and he's got a brother who's an off spinner who's as good as well.
They've got to stick with one or the other. I mean, look, there is a certain argument that Australian batters have a bit of an issue with left arm orthodox spin historically, but yeah, they need to settle on one. Their attack is not settled at the moment, and without Joe Root, they wouldn't be making all that many runs either. All righty, well, that takes us out, Jack.
Just one thing, just a little parting thing. I always like a politician who can sledge people, a bit of an insult. Senator John Kennedy, I think he's from the South somewhere. He's a Republican anyway. And he was doing an interview. It was all very relaxed, and he was talking about Washington. He says, "I know many people in Washington D.C. that would unplug your life support to charge their cell phone."
Excellent work. That's probably right. in the UK, Jack, you can just stick it straight into the lamppost and you'll be all right. All right, well, that takes us out of episode 86. We hope you've enjoyed our return to the airwaves, and we look forward to coming up with next week's episode for you and handing them out regularly. You're not going on holidays anytime soon, Jack?
No, not for a little while.
And I've done mine, so that means we'll be back with you regularly, weekly, and we look forward to doing that. Don't forget, listeners, drop us a line, let us know what you think of the program, and any questions, any criticisms. We'd love to hear from you. You can get hold of me on Twitter. My DMs are always open, and you can get hold of Jack on his Substack. Give it to me, Jack.
Yeah, hongkongjack.substack.com.
I should have remembered that by now. All right. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.